but this one is from June 1996 edition of the Washington Post. I'm quoting, "The state of Maryland plans to connect every public school to the internet this year, part of a $53 million effort to give students greater access to far-flung information via computer," Governor Paris and Clendening announced yesterday. I'm still quoting, "Despite mixed reviews by national analysts who have studied computer use in schools, the plan calls for each of Maryland's 1,262 public schools to have at least 2 computer terminals linked to the internet before winter, and for every classroom to have 3 to 5 such terminals within 5 years," unquote. Governor Clendening, by the way, calls this a bold and big initiative and expects tens of millions of additional dollars to be donated by private enterprise, so that the total expenditure will be close for this 1 year to be close to $100 million. Here is his justification, and again, I quote, "Accessing information is the first vital step in understanding and ultimately improving the world we live in," unquote. Now let's put aside the fact that at best this is a problematic claim and at worst nonsense. Let's also put aside the fact that even if the governor's claim is true, American students already have an oversupply of sources of information and do not require a multi-million-dollar investment to be well-informed citizens. Putting all that aside, will you agree with me that the following hypothetical statement, which I'm making up, would be happier news and more rational for both teachers and students? Quote, I'm quoting my own statement. "The state of Maryland intends to spend $100 million to increase the number of teachers in the state, to pay those we have more, and to reduce teaching loads." Governor Clendening said, "This is a vital step toward assuring that our students will be given a more attentive, wholesome, and creative education," unquote. Now, I should think most teachers would support such an investment, but we hear very little from them on this score. In fact, many teachers are thrilled, absolutely thrilled, by the thought of a $100 million investment in computer terminals. Bill Gates loves this sort of stupidity. Here is a fifth question. What changes in language are being enforced by new technologies, and what is being gained and lost by such changes? I feel sure you'll agree with me that no matter what new media come into our lives, language will remain our most indispensable medium, and that it's always a serious matter when new meanings arise or old ones are lost. Think, for example, of how the words community and conversation are now employed by those who use the internet. I was asked a couple of summers ago if I'd be willing to have a conversation with Seymour Papert, who's a very distinguished technophile up at MIT. He's written some good books about it. And I said, sure, I'd be happy. When will he be in New York? The guy said, well, he's not coming to New York. He's on vacation in Cape Cod. And I said, well, I have no intention to go to Cape Cod. And they said, no, you don't understand. you will do this through email. So I said, this is not a conversation. Email is two guys typing messages to each other. Don't you agree? I mean, two guys typing messages to each other doesn't have anything about it that is similar to a conversation, or at least very little about it. So I said I would do it, but they dare not call it a conversation. I said, you can say, Postman and Papert typed these messages to each other, and then you can print it. And as for the term community, by the way, as it's used on the internet, you should examine that very carefully, because it's almost being used in the way opposite to the usual meaning of community. Most people, when they talk about they're joining a community on the internet, mean they've joined with people of similar interests. Now, the more traditional meaning of the word community seems to me that these are people who do not necessarily have the same interests, but who must negotiate and accommodate their differences for the sake of social harmony. So it's almost the opposite meaning. Think of how we've changed the meaning of political debate. I mean, perhaps the most interesting change. If you used Lincoln and Douglas debates as your example, you know that not untypically, Lincoln would speak for 3 hours, Douglas for 3, Lincoln would have an hour for rebuttal. Then they'd go to Springfield or Ottawa, and it'd be the other way around. Douglas for 3, Lincoln for 3, and then Douglas with an hour for rebuttal. Our version is Barbara Walters says, this question is for you, Senator Dole, after which the President Clinton, will have 2 minutes to rebut. What do you think is the cause of the problem in the Middle East, and how will we solve it? Now, the laugh is on us, because we say to each other next morning, did you see the debate last night? We have to think of how new technologies change meanings of words, like participatory democracy. Not long ago, I reviewed a book called The Electronic Republic, and the author argued that the new technologies will make representative democracy obsolete because they'll make it possible to have instant plebiscites on every issue. So in this way, voters will directly decide if we should join NAFTA or send troops to Bosnia or impeach the president. The Senate and the House will be largely unnecessary. And this, the author said, is participatory democracy, just as it was in Athens in the 5th century BC. Now, I've no objection, by the way, to borrowing a phrase from an older media environment in order to conceptualize a new development. We do it all the time, but it has its risks, and we have to pay attention when it's done. To call a train an iron horse, as we once did, may be picturesque, but it obscures the most significant differences between a train